I freaking hate this pick yourself up by your bootstrap bullshit. And the reason is this. It's easy to say that people always make their own way because it's true. But if you live somewhere that seems to only offer a handful of choices for your future, you believe that you can only pick from those for yourself. Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm going to continue with the Framily theme we've had here this month. And I want to, as I always do on this Friday podcast, talk more specifically about the way that, in my opinion, applies to recovery, mental health struggles, and things of that nature. And you know, the reason I want to talk about it is because when I tell my story, and I've told it a lot of times, you know, everything from the drug dealing to the drug using to how I started using and drinking to the family turmoil that existed earlier on in my life, like around the age of 13, 14 and the move and everything. When we focus in most of the talks that I give or most of the conversations that I have about it, we focus on what was it like in jail? What was drug dealing like? What did you use and how did you get out of it, etc. But I've given a few talks where I've mentioned this specifically, and I think it's important to really put an emphasis on it, that none of the stuff that I was able to do would have been possible at all without my family support. I wouldn't be where I am right now. I wouldn't have probably made it to jail and gotten a year instead of like the 13 years that I was looking at. I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing now after jail. And I'll go into all these in particular. But, you know, my parents supported me. First of all, when I got arrested with all the drugs, they were there to support me. But then, you know, all my drugs and all my money were gone. My parents helped pay for a lawyer. And it was a good lawyer, which is why I got what I got. And I spent only a year in jail. But then they supported me during the trial. My dad showed up to every court date I had, which meant every month he had to fly from New York to come see me. When I was in jail, my dad came, I think 4 or 5 times. He flew, stood in line in downtown LA to come see me behind a piece of glass, sitting there in jumpers, talking to him. And then when I got out, and I've talked about it before, I couldn't get a job. For 6 to 9 months, I was unable to support myself. My parents helped pay my rent because, you know, I might seem like a good guy right now, but at the time, I only knew how to pay rent one way, and that was selling drugs. You know, I wasn't about to go get, given my mentality, et cetera, I probably wasn't ready, especially during the trial itself, to go get a minimum wage job, which I should have been ready for, but I wasn't. And so they supported me while I was trying to get jobs. And 6 to 9 months later, I hadn't gotten a job. I was looking at that point at the mall, anything that I could get, could not get a job because of my record once I got out. And so I went to school. And then my parents paid for school, right? It was a Cal State Long Beach school. It was in, in state, so it was relatively cheap, but it was thousands of dollars a month kind of cheap. I mean, a semester kind of cheap. And so still money. And then fortunately, I'm so grateful I got a scholarship then, and then they got their money back, and the rest of my education was supported by the work. And so then I was able to kind of catch up and start producing, and I got a job by that point. I was paying my way and paying for food and some of my rent, etc. But for a couple of years, my parents had my back. And in my book, I talk about biology, psychology, environment, and spirituality as being the 4 factors that I see as being hugely important when we have discussions about addiction and mental health in general. And I got to say, family, and if you expand that to Framily, that factor alone hits 3 or 4 of those 4 important elements: the biology, psychology, environment, and spirituality. So yes, I understand that a lot of people talk about the importance of this factor of family and support. But I'm gonna come out and say that even with all the importance we give it, it's still underappreciated. You know, I'm going to talk about the specific way in which I think this matters, but it's so easy to focus on your own deeds because from your own perspective, you're the person who did them. And it's so easy to focus on what somebody else did because you see them taking action and you say, I saw them doing A, B, or C, and then they got the result. What you don't get to see, what is harder to appreciate, is all the behind the scenes stuff, right? All the work you don't get to see, all the stuff that is happening that is making it feasible for that person to act. So I want to break down today how Framily is such an important part of this by breaking it down into the three factors I think it affects the most, and that's biology, psychology, and environment. So let's start with this. Let's start with biology. You know, biology is more than just your genes. In actuality, I come from a family where supposedly my grandfather on my mom's side, so my mom's dad, he had a drinking problem. And that was well known, and it potentially even caused part of his death. My mom might have drank a little bit more than others when she was younger, but does not have a drinking problem. My dad was a teetotaler. He didn't touch alcohol because he got too drunk once when he was either in high school or in the military. Hated the way he felt so much that he just never really drank before. I've seen him like have a sip or two of wine and then say, no, I'm good, thank you, and never have more. And even that only happened about 4 times in my life. So biology is just more than just your genes, because in terms of genetics, there might have been some predisposition in my past, and there wasn't a lot of it though. And for other people that I see on a regular basis, genetics absolutely do play a part in the way your body responds to the world around it. What happens when certain chemicals come into your body, what happens when certain stressors hit, how you react to so many different things is partially biologically determined. If you haven't heard our interview with Bruce Lipton, or if you haven't heard of the field of epigenetics, even your genetics, though, are affected by a lot of the other elements that we're going to talk about. And one of those is wellness. And by that, I mean nutrition and activity, right? And so part of your biology is not just the genes that make you up, but it's what you eat and how you move. And that has a lot to do with your family, right? I mean, what you're born into, you don't pick the food you're going to eat, especially as a child. You don't pick the level of activity your family shows to you or the family models for you. And so wellness, and by that, again, nutrition and activity, are hugely important components that you actually sort of also inherit from your family to some extent, and the greater environment, right? Framily. You know, when it comes to nutrition, it doesn't matter what your genes do. You can't build a palace with crappy materials. If you have an amazing plan, an amazing architectural plan for a palace of a body, because your genetics are off the hook, amazing, incredible, but you feed yourself shit, sugar, too much caffeine, too little nutrition, etc. You're feeding crappy materials into a great architectural plan. The palace is going to suck, right? It's going to be really, really difficult to build something substantial and long-lasting on it. And so many of us have these effects of anxiety or depression and things like that that we don't even equate with nutrition, but have so much to do with the fuel we're putting in our body. And when it comes to activity, literally how lethargic or active you are on a daily basis, so much of that is modeled after what your life was like growing up. In my family, we did spend a lot of time outside and we were very, very active. A lot of the clients that I have, they didn't have that. And you know, the thing is, if you don't have physical momentum, you're going to be stopped psychologically and physically. There's going to be a force that stops you if you don't get momentum. It's just physics and also sort of metaphysical physics, right? The idea of your psychology, if you can't get momentum. And part of that comes from actually being active and moving about. So how wellness plays a part in your family affects your biology, because your nutrition and your activity feed into your genetics in order to build the sort of life that you live, the machine that is you. And then there's another important piece that it's not really biology, but it's physical. And what I mean by that is resources, right? What biologically, what physically can your family give to you? Like I just mentioned, my family gave me a lot, and I understand and respect and honor and am grateful for the fact that they were able to do that. Not everybody has that. And we're going to talk about it again here in a moment, but my parents gave money, money for rent. If I didn't have money for rent, I would have had to come up with money for rent, or I would have been homeless. And because I didn't want to be homeless, I know how I would have come up with money for rent at the time. I would have sold more drugs, right? I would have used the resources I knew how to use. And so getting Framily kind of biological, physical resources is huge. Having a place to live, having a roof over your head, having physiological and monetary support is so important. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, having your physiological needs taken care of and your safety are paramount. You don't have that, and those are the only two things you're focusing on. So that's really, really important, and that's sort of wraps up biology as part of the whole Framily equation of how that plays into recovery. And then we get into psychology. I talk to my heroes all the time in my Ignited Hero program about the script you get handed down. We all got handed a psychological script. In my family, it was work hard, put your head down, never complain, and just work, and try to be as perfect and as amazing as you can be. And that was the script. If you do that, life will come to you and you will be happy, but you better be pretty damn close to perfect. And so many of us got handed a script from our families, and we've been reading from it, really like holding a book in front of our face, like you're an actor and you're just reading from it and going, oh, when I'm in this situation, this script calls for acting this way. A lot of what we do in Ignited is about re-scripting. It's about changing the story of what it is that you're supposed to do in different situations. And the overarching principles of psychology matter so much when it comes to recovery, whether it's from addiction or other mental health kind of struggles, right? And let's just start with trauma. Trauma changes who you are physiologically and psychologically. Literally, it affects neurophysiological and neurochemical processes in your brain and affects the development of certain brain areas, especially when it happens early on in life. And it also affects you in the way that you see the world, right? And part of that is through the biology, but the rest of it is literally through the experience. If you've been physically abused, psychologically abused, sexually abused, especially repeatedly, but even one-off events, it, in a very distinct way, completely changes the way you see the world. And so if you come from a family where trauma was ingrained, where that was a big part of your experience growing up, you are different than people who have not gone through that. Now, we're all different, like, fingerprints are different. But what I mean is big T trauma puts you in a different category just because of the physiological changes. I grew up in an environment where I felt relatively safe all the time. If you grow up in an environment where you don't feel relatively safe all the time, that is a completely different way of living. So that's one thing in which Framily affects your psychology. And then just communication. How do you learn to talk? How do you learn to share? What do you learn matters in terms of the way you present yourself in words to other people? And what do you learn doesn't? Because the thing is this, if you never learn how to communicate, you're going to be saying nothing to no one forever. We have to learn how to talk to other people, intimacy building, relationships, engaging with others and being social is all about communication. And if you come from a family where that's not taught well, if you learn how to communicate in ways that are isolationist or keep you apart from others, you will carry that, right? You will keep reading from that script, and that will cause you struggles, and those will be struggles you'll have to learn how to deal with. Another element of psychology that I think is really, really important when it comes to Framily is support. How do you look at yourself? How are you told to look at your self-worth? How do you perceive others and their self-worth? Do you learn that supporting others, that helping others is important? Are you taught to help? Is seeing others in need even something that's discussed? Because how can you learn that you're worthy and that people in general are worthy of achieving great things if nobody ever told you so? My parents paid my rent. And like I said, that had to do with resources. And that was incredibly important by itself. But it went farther than that. Them putting aside those resources for me, way over and above the blessings of the fact that they even had those resources to give me, but the fact that they let me have and partake in them, it meant the world in terms of showing me that they thought I was worth the effort, the time, and the money. Now, the reason that's partially specifically important in my story is that's part of what caused me all my turmoil earlier on in life was I always felt like unless I was perfect my parents didn't feel like I was good enough. That interaction with my parents, when they started showing up, and there were still conditions, right? I had to stay clean. I had to go to rehab. There was all this stuff I had to do. But when they showed back up for me, it showed me that they thought I mattered. And sometimes that's all you need psychologically, is just for somebody to show you that you matter. Now, the last factor here has to do with the environment. I mean, obviously, the actual literal environment in which you grow up matters. I grew up in a nice neighborhood, upper middle class in Israel, friends, parks, playing around, trees, all that wonderful stuff. But there are different specific elements of your environment that really affect how you grow up and perceive the world. And the first of those is your environment reliable and secure, or is it unsafe and unpredictable? You know, if you can't even count on dinner or a hug or just safety, it's going to be really hard to count on yourself to make it, because you're always out scanning, right? Your brain is always looking for the next thing it needs to watch out for. And as we've learned before, we're not really great at multitasking. And so if your brain is keeping itself safe by always scanning the environment, it doesn't have a lot of time for self-growth. You learn where to pay attention by what your environment demands. And as the amazing Robert Cialdini, who's a really, really great social psychologist, talks about, where you put your attention is the thing that seems the most important to you and the things that's going to take the most cognitive effort from your brain. And so if your attention is on safety and keeping yourself secure, you're not going to be moving forward very well. Another thing about the environment is, does it present growth opportunities for you, or does it stifle you with very little choice? You know, I freaking hate this pick yourself up by your bootstrap bullshit. And the reason is this. It's easy to say that people always make their own way, because it's true. But if you live somewhere that seems to only offer a handful of choices for your future, you believe that you can only pick from those for yourself. So if you only see your options in the world as being a drug dealer or a drug addict or homeless or keeping a minimum wage job, that might be in your reality, in your head, the only options you think you're picking from. And so there might be a million other options there for you, but if you don't see them and you don't understand that they exist and you don't believe in them, then it doesn't matter what other people think. You will not pursue them because you don't see them as being in your wheelhouse. And a follow-up on that is, does your environment provide role models, or do they provide counterexamples? Because if you want to do well in almost anything, you rely on models of others who've done it. That's true in math class. It's true in sports, right? Where you admire somebody and you start emulating them. It's true in careers. If you can't have somebody to mentor you, or somebody that you want to follow, or somebody you want to admire or emulate yourself, creating brand new possibilities is really more difficult. So if your Framily gives you an environment that is limiting and suffocates you in terms of possibilities, it's going to make it really, really hard to grow. Now, we just finished this month of talking about Framily. And so I know we kind of went front and center in terms of the importance of the family you have and the people around you and creating the life that you want to have. The reason I think this is so important for this topic in particular is a lot of people who listen to this and are struggling don't have the support in place they want. Their biology has been compromised in all aspects, the genetics, the wellness, and the current resources. Psychology has been compromised as well. There's been trauma in the past. They never learned how to communicate effectively, especially around intimacy and emotions, and they don't have the support or the perception of self-efficacy and self-worth that they could have gotten from earlier experiences. Sometimes it's the exact opposite. They've actually gotten the perception that they are worthless. And then in terms of their environment, present and past, it was unreliable, it was unsafe, it was unpredictable, and that makes it hard to pay attention to anything but safety. And there were not a lot of choices in terms of where you were going to go, and there were not a lot of great role models. And so they followed what was there, and it led them where they are. Here's the beautiful thing about it. We do get to make a choice about changing those things. Does making the choice of changing them immediately create change? Not always. But listen, if you are recognizing as you listen to this that your environment, your family, has compromised some of these elements, it's time to start picking new examples, new role models, new people to interact with. Now, Ignited offers one of those. I hope you interact with the people online with us and you comment on some of the social media stuff that we do. But I urge you to go one step farther. I urge you to start creating a chosen family, right? Friends and family who you've picked from the people in this milieu, in this environment of individuals who are looking to get ignited, looking for purpose, looking to move up and up and up. Because you're worth it, and I know you are. And if you've recognized that these three factors have been compromised in the family and friends that you came to this equation, this story, this moment with, then that's okay. And you've done the best that you can to this moment. But all we got to do is create a tiny bit of change. Even the 1% change you can create tomorrow, reaching out to one more person, adjusting your wellness in one way, right? Starting to communicate and talk more openly. All of these elements will be the building blocks that will allow you to gradually create your own palace. I want to thank you so much for paying attention to this and closing out this month with me. And I want to leave you with this. Share this episode with somebody you think could benefit from it. Share it with a loved one, a partner, a family member maybe, somebody who you know is struggling and needs to start understanding why that's happening. And if this really spoke to you, take a screenshot and tag me and tag them so we can connect and move this message forward. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.